on ILTV. I'm Kalev Ben David. In the coming hours, EDAN Alexander, a 21-year-old American-Israeli held hostage in Gaza by Hamas since October 7th, 2023, is set to be released after 584 days in captivity. Now, his release is the result of unprecedented direct negotiations between the United States and Hamas, with President Trump making a surprise announcement overnight on X, in which he said this was, quote, a step taken in good faith towards the United States and the efforts of the mediators, Qatar and Egypt, to put an end to this very brutal war and return all living hostages and remains to their loved ones. Now, Israel seemed to be caught surprised by this announcement, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeting, quote, the U.S. has informed Israel of Hamas's intention to release soldier EDAN Alexander as a gesture to the Americans without conditions or anything in exchange. Israel is not committed to a ceasefire of any kind or the release of terrorists, but only to a safe corridor that will allow for the release of EDAN. U.S. Special Envoy for Negotiations Steve Witkoff is expected to arrive in Israel later today to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And President Trump is set to leave for his visit to the region, visiting Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates over the next 3 days. Now, also on the way to Israel from their home in New Jersey is EDAN Alexander's family, and they released this statement. Today, on Mother's Day, we received the greatest gift imaginable, news that our beautiful son EDAN is returning home after 583 days in captivity in Gaza. We express our deepest gratitude to President Trump, Steve Witkoff, and the U.S. administration for their tireless work to make this happen. We urge the Israeli government and the negotiating teams, please don't stop. We hope our son's release begins negotiations for all 58 remaining hostages, ending this nightmare for them and their families. No hostage should be left behind. Now, our reporter Shosh Bedrosian is in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. Let's go to her. Shosh, of course, there has to be joy there at the release of EDAN Alexander, but this is a hostage release like no other we've seen before. What's the mood and the messages there in Hostage Square?
Yeah, exactly right, Kalev. I've actually been covering these hostage releases from the very beginning, starting with the latest ceasefire that began in January. We've seen all of these hostages so far have been released, come out. We've seen the process unfold. I've been in Hostage Square for all of them to take place. And I'll tell you, right before any hostage is released, there is a lot of silence here. People are anticipating. They're waiting for this very moment to take place. They're waiting for the live stream to actually begin on this big screen that's over my shoulder behind me. But right now, the families of some of these hostages who will not be coming home today are speaking out, specifically Matan Zaytar. He's been held in captivity, of course, this time. She is calling on President Donald Trump to make sure the rest of these hostages come back home. A lot of these families believe and truly feel that President Trump, Steve Witkoff, have in making these. There's actually a sign right now of the crowd here that is the trust. There's so much trust in the Trump administration. That if anyone can do it, the States government. In his family's voices, I just wanted of the is to come home. Today is EDAN Alexander. He is coming home after way more than 500, close to 580 point in the last since believed to be alive. Activity at this. This is a moment that actually caught the family by surprise. Yesterday on Monday, his family, his father Adi, his mother Yael, received a call saying that EDAN will be released in coming days. This came as a surprise to them. And they had no idea this was coming. So for the family making their way to see EDAN for the first time in a year and a half. Kalev?
All right, and I just want to I want to welcome our viewers who are tuning in now to this special broadcast on ILTV. I'm Kalev Ben David. Now, in the coming hours, EDAN Alexander, a 21-year-old American-Israeli held hostage in Gaza by Hamas since October 7th, 2023, is set to be released after 584 days in captivity. Now, his release is the result of unprecedented direct negotiations between the U.S. and Hamas, with President Donald Trump making a surprise announcement overnight on X, in which he said this was, quote, a step taken in good faith towards the United States and the efforts of the mediators, Qatar and Egypt, to put an end to this very brutal war and return all living hostages and remains to their loved ones. Now, Israel seemed to be caught by surprise by this announcement, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeting, quote, the U.S. has informed Israel of Hamas's intention to release soldier EDAN Alexander as a gesture to the Americans without conditions or anything in exchange. Israel has not committed to a ceasefire of any kind or the release of terrorists, but only to a safe corridor that will allow for the release of EDAN. U.S. Special Envoy for Negotiations Steve Witkoff is expected to arrive in Israel later today to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and President Trump is set to leave for his visit to the region, visiting Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates over the next 3 days. Now, also on the way to Israel from their home in New Jersey is EDAN Alexander's family, which yesterday released this statement, quote, today on Mother's Day, we received the greatest gift imaginable. News that our beautiful son EDAN is returning home after 583 days in captivity in Gaza. We express our deepest gratitude to President Trump, Steve Witkoff, and the U.S. administration for their tireless work to make this happen. We urge the Israeli government and the negotiating teams, please don't stop. We hope our son's release begins negotiations for all remaining 58 hostages, ending this nightmare for them and their families. No hostage should be left behind. Well, joining us now is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Orin. And Ambassador Orin, we certainly have to be joyful that EDAN Alexander is getting his freedom. But this is a hostage deal like no other. It sets all kinds of precedents. First of all, I just want to get your reaction on hearing the news about this deal negotiated directly between the U.S. and Hamas.
Well, first of all, we have to say that we are delighted that EDAN's getting out of captivity. Certainly. But with that, and there's a big but, it is a victory for Hamas. It's a master stroke for Hamas. In one move, it divides both Israel and the United States, and will also divide the people of Israel, because it will greatly enhance the pressure on the government to make further concessions, including the ultimate concession, which is ending the war, in order to get all of the other hostages released. A master stroke. And I wouldn't be surprised now if the pressure on the Netanyahu government, both domestically and from the Trump administration, increases manifoldly, and the government will be faced with a situation or a decision whether to accept an overall prolonged ceasefire in return for withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip, the return of Palestinians to the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and the return of the hostages. And then the Israeli government will have to decide whether it can live with that. My gut feeling tells me it will not be able to live with that, and the prime minister may go to early elections.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but let's try to put this in the bigger regional context. There's no coincidence. It's coming on the day that President Trump is departing for this visit to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Emirates. So how does this hostage release fit in with the overall agenda that it looks like President Trump will now be pursuing in this region?
Well, let's deconstruct it, okay? Let's reverse engineer it. What does President Trump want? He wants a peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. He wants a celebratory ceremony on the south lawn of the White House. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He wants Saudi investment in the American economy. It's very well to do that as long as Israel is in Gaza and fighting in Gaza and Palestinians are getting killed. So I feel that the assumption that we had, or certainly the IDF had, starting back to January, February, that we had an infinite amount of time to deal with Hamas in Gaza. I think that's mistaken. I think there's an hourglass which is dropping grains as we speak, and that there's going to be increasing pressure on Israel to conclude its military operations in Gaza and to accept a deal. And that deal will open the door both to the possibility of Saudi-Israeli rapprochement, to Saudi investment in the American economy, and other doors will open as a result of that. So the president believes. I think Israel doesn't necessarily subscribe to that. And the feeling, I think, among leadership circles in Israel is that should Hamas be perceived as winning this war, then not only will Israel have to deal with upheavals in Judea and Samaria, but the chances of making peace accords are actually lessened, because who's going to make peace with what could be perceived as a loser country?
Michael, as U.S. ambassador, as Israeli ambassador to the U.S. during the Obama administration, you were in that hot seat of when the Israeli government, when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to basically oppose policies being taken by its greatest ally, and today maybe its only ally, the United States. Now, we know Steve Witkoff is arriving in Israel later today to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. What would you advise, if you were there now in that room, what would you be advising Prime Minister Netanyahu to say? What would you be ready to say to, for example, Steve Witkoff?
I would say pretty much what I just said to you now, that yes, that you could get a deal, perhaps a deal that would enable Hamas to move out of its tunnels and come back to the surface and reclaim and rearm Gaza. But the long-term perspective, if people want to remember the president as someone who brought peace to the Middle East and not instability in the Middle East and not laid the groundwork for a future war, you'd say, stand strong beside Israel and its democratically elected leaders. The same thing would be true about the prospect of a U.S.-Iranian deal. A similar deal to that which Obama signed in 2015 will once again enrich Iran, enable it to reestablish its hegemony over Syria, to rebuild Hamas and Hezbollah. And the case we would make that very quickly Israel would find itself back on October 6, 2023, which doesn't serve America's long-term interests in the Middle East. That's the best case you can possibly make. You press that. Israel, at the end of the day, is going to have to make a decision, Kalev, which is, are there fundamental issues over which we cannot compromise? And if so, what price are we willing to pay in order to remain steadfast around those issues? Because certainly, if we reject a plan for Gaza ceasefire that is forwarded by Steve Witkoff in the Trump administration, I imagine there would be a backlash, wouldn't there? And if Israel were to act, as they say, kinetically against Iran at a time when the United States is negotiating with Iran, there'd be a price to pay for that too. At the end of the day, these are decisions that Ben Gurion made, that Menachem Begin made, and it is, why our leaders are supposedly our leaders, is to make the very hard decisions. Right.
Well, one of them might be I want to go back to your earlier statement that perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu would have to call early elections. What would be the repercussions politically for Prime Minister Netanyahu being put kind of in the corner, because he did basically put all his chips in that the Trump administration being more sympathetic to the aims of his government than, for example, the prior Biden administration. So what are the options, both, you mentioned diplomatically, also politically, for Prime Minister Netanyahu now?
Well, he's not in a very enviable position, because if he accepts the Trump plan, we don't know what this plan looks like, but let's say that there is a plan for a ceasefire and hostage release. If he accepts it, there are elements in his government who won't accept it, and they will bolt the government. If he doesn't accept it, the streets are going to go on fire again in a much bigger way, and Israel will find itself isolated even further in the world. So either way, you have to figure out, okay, what is the least best scenario here? And Netanyahu will have other considerations. He's thinking about the future security of the state of Israel. He's thinking about his legacy. He was born to secure the state of Israel, not jeopardize his future. So the way he believes it. So it's one of these situations where you got to say a little blessing that you're not in his shoes, irrespective of how you feel about him. It is a brutal decision he'll have to make. But I think it's coming, Caleb. I really do.
Right. Michael, if I can get personal for 1 minute. Hey, let's go back to Aiden Alexander, the young man who we should expect to be released in the coming moments. A young man, an American Jew, raised in New Jersey, leaves his family behind, becomes a lone soldier in Israel. I think that might have a familiar ring for you, and I wanted to,
Right.
if you want, if you know.
But he has one thing that I don't have. He has one thing that I don't have. This is very important. He has an American passport. And I gave up my American passport in order to be ambassador. I would have had to have given up again to be a member of Knesset. You cannot serve two countries at the same time. And there are a number of people in a similar situation that I am, including Benjamin Netanyahu, who gave up his American citizenship. And it creates, again, we are delighted that if he gets out, we share in this utter happiness of his family, the Alexander family, but it creates a situation of, as they say in Hebrew, eifa ve'eifa, of discrimination against the holders of only Israeli passports. And that's going to have ramifications for the way Israeli a rush on people trying to get foreign passports after this. I myself am very happy with my Israeli passport, and I'll take the consequences for it. But I can't speak for others.
Well, I'm just going to go back to the comment which Ambassador Mike Huckabee, surely a very unquestionably great supporter of Israel, but his comment just a couple of days ago that the U.S. would not intervene to act against the Houthis now unless one of their rockets should strike one of those Israelis who hold a U.S. passport, which is a somewhat striking comment to hear from Ambassador Huckabee.
That is, what can I say? It is an interesting comment. It's an interesting comment, but it says a lot now, doesn't it? And, we'd like to think of ourselves as being the indispensable ally of the state of the United States, and that Israeli lives matter, and not just Israeli lives if they happen to have an American passport. We'd like to think that. I don't know how much that holds. I'm sure that people do care, but they care the degree to which they're willing to forego a ceasefire with the Houthis, for example. I don't know. I think that one thing is certain about this administration is that there's no certainty. It is very unpredictable, and that Israel has to do two things, Kalev. One, it has to prepare for every possibility, every scenario, from the United States unilaterally recognizing a Palestinian state, or cutting a JCPA-like deal with Iran, to giving Saudi Arabia nuclear power and not linking that gesture to a normalization process between Saudi Arabia and Israel. All these different scenarios, we have to prepare for it the way we prepare contingency plans for a war. But these were diplomatic contingency plans, and be prepared. That's the first thing we have to do. The second thing we have to do is simply decide, what are we willing to stand on? What are our principles? What are our fundamental issues? And if we're willing to stand that in the face of, or in the cost of, saying no to the president, are we willing to bear the consequences of that decision?
All right. Well, certainly Israel is facing some hard decisions ahead. But in the meantime, as we said at the beginning of our discussion, the key today, right now, certainly in the coming hours, is the release of EDAN Alexander. We have to be happy for his family. We have to be happy, of course, for the state of Israel getting one of its sons back, and hopefully, in one way or another, however that should be, it would lead to the release of more hostages. Former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Dr. Michael Orin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Let's go now to our correspondent, Shosh Bedrosian, who again is in Hostage Square. And of course, you've been there in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv for all releases, Shosh. But this is one that is unlike any other, as we just discussed. So what is the mood there? What are the messages you're perhaps hearing there?
Yeah, I think everyone is still in shock, still trying to process that EDAN Alexander, the last living American hostage, is actually coming home today. You know, we've seen mixed signals, a lot of communication that has not been so good when it comes to Hamas. People can't trust them. And I think, and from my experience, the only time they really believe a hostage is finally coming home is when that handover happens between the Red Cross to the IDF. And once that hostage comes back onto Israeli territory, they know that this is real, this is happening. Now, EDAN Alexander, you can see on your screen right now, has been seen alive in 2 different propaganda videos within the last few months that was released by Hamas. The first sign of life he actually ever had was this past November while he was in captivity. That was November 2024. His family was grateful they had a sign of life. Of course, though, he was emotional. He's seen in these dark tunnels. It's been reported he's been held in these tunnels by himself starved, tortured. Remember, he's an Israeli soldier. He's a lone soldier. He came to Israel by himself, although his parents are from Israel. He came here to serve. He put his college degree on pause in the United States from Tenafly, New Jersey, a community that had a lot of Jewish pride, a lot of Israeli pride as well. And he came here to serve Israel. He believed in this country and what it stood for. He was there on October 7th at Kibbutz Mirim, trying to defend it. And that base was overrun by terrorists that day. That's when he was kidnapped. He was a soldier in the Golani unit. This is a person who was 19 years old when he was taken. He is now 21 years old. Imagine having two birthdays in Hamas captivity. We've heard stories and testimonies from these hostages. They have been able to keep track of time while they've spent their days together or even isolated, trying to track when Shabbat was, when the start of the week was, and finding their own different ways of surviving mentally. And that is what's so critical to remember. These hostages have gone through hell and back, physically, mentally tortured in all different capacities. But this, Kalev, like you said, is a monumental moment. An American hostage is coming back. And the sentiment and the emotion that is felt here in Hostage Square right now is so many people thanking the Trump administration for getting this done yet again. People are seeing the envoy, the Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, for securing this deal as someone they're putting on such a high pedestal of someone that can get things done. And that's what they're feeling. They want their kids to benefit from the Trump administration as well. We just heard a few parents make a plea to Trump. Don't forget about the other 58 hostages. That includes about half bodies and half living male hostages as well. There are still so many people who are alive in captivity, who are being held in deplorable conditions, suffering from severe injuries. And EDAN Alexander clearly has gotten to the point of survival, and we are hoping we will see him alive very soon. Now, this handover was expected to start around noon, although there was no definitive time of when Hamas was technically going to release him. But remember, this is a weekday here in Israel, and people are here. It's growing and growing by the minute, the amount of people who are coming to Hostage Square to see this happen on this live stream. That's usually the events that take place. People come, they chant, they sing songs, and then the live stream will come up. And these live streams are emotional. It's the first time people have seen these hostages alive in more than 580 days. Everyone just wants to catch a glimpse of what they look like, how they're walking, what they're wearing. And remember, there is no quote-unquote handover ceremony by Hamas in this hostage release. Likely, of course, as you said, in a gesture to President Donald Trump. Over the last few months that we've seen these hostage releases, Hamas has put on these grotesque ceremonies as if they are prisoners, although they were kidnapped as civilians, as soldiers. And that's something we will not see, and we will see a different type of live stream and handovers today.
Right, he's going to be taken, from what we understand, directly handed over. We don't even know the circumstances. It would be the Red Cross or to Israeli forces and driven to Reim Air Force Base. A helicopter then taken to Tel Aviv's Ichilov Hospital, as has been done. Shosh, just a word about EDAN Alexander. He actually, on that morning when he was taken captive, which was the Simchat Torah holiday in Israel, he was given the opportunity not to show up to his army base because his mother, Yael, was visiting in Israel. He could have taken that off, but he agreed to go back to the base because he didn't want someone else there to miss the opportunity to get out. So that's the kind of outstanding young man that he is, and his family is. His mother is on the way. She's expected in Israel about 3 p.m. Local time. His father was expected a few hours after that. But the fact that he is, do have to raise the fact that he is getting out because he holds an American passport. And this has been an issue for many of the hostages' families, concerned about the kind of precedent of the fact of someone getting almost to say preferential treatment because he holds a foreign passport. So, and of course, all of them surely happy for the release of EDAN Alexander, but it is a challenging moment for them as well.
For sure, absolutely. And I want to make a comment that there is a distinct difference between what we're experiencing now once Trump got into the Oval Office. Once he became president, there is a difference between what's happening now and what happened when President Biden was in office. Remember, there were Americans. There was Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was actually murdered in Hamas captivity. He could not be saved, even though he had an American passport. When all of this happened, he could not be saved. And it is a tragedy for so many people to know Hirsch's story. He had his arm blown up on October 7th, survived captivity for more than 8-9 months just to be brutally murdered in August. He was executed with several other hostages found in a tunnel. And that story still is the heartbeat of so many people, knowing that these hostages couldn't be saved in time. Remember, he, like I said, had an American passport. So that's why people here in Israel see the Trump administration as something new, something different, and someone that can get things done. So far, since February, we have seen the release of more than 26 plus hostages, from female soldiers to older hostages that were held in captivity. Gadi Moses. We had American hostage Keith Stiegel, who was released as well back in the first deal when there was a ceasefire. Remember, that ceasefire broke in March. That's when Israel decided to renew their ground offensive inside of the Gaza Strip. And remember, let's bring some more context into this. We are at a time where a major ground offensive is likely going to start soon. So what happens to this? What happens to these new military plans inside of the Gaza Strip? Will they be postponed if a breakthrough can be achieved to get the remaining 58 hostages back out? And I want to continue about the American passports for a moment, Kalev. There are 4 more Americans whose bodies are still in Hamas captivity at this time. We heard reports yesterday that there is still ongoing negotiations to get them out as well. One of them is Omer Nutra from Long Island. He was an IDF soldier that day, too, who was credited for being a leader in those moments. He was in the tank with several other people. And these, like you said, there are heroic acts. So many of these hostages have stayed behind and helped so many people. And now they've been in captivity for so long. And EDAN Alexander is one of them. And hopefully everyone is crossing their fingers, waiting to see him walk out of captivity and get a glimpse of what he looks like now.
Right, and Shosh, we should mention, of course, or re-mention that the Netanyahu government has said at this stage, as far as they're concerned, that operation, which is set to take place after President Trump's visit to the region concludes, which ends on Friday, that as far as they're concerned, that operation is going ahead. We should note the Hostage Families Forum, this body representing many of the hostages' families, has come out and asked that it be delayed, that there'd be time given more negotiations. But there are other families, either connected with the hostages or certainly families with young men fighting in Gaza, who have said, we know military pressure is the only way to go ahead in order to get Hamas to make this kind of release. So this issue itself is dividing many of the either hostage families or people who have personal stakes, families involved there in Gaza.
Absolutely. And it's not just the Hostages Family Forum that represents these families. There's another body called the Tikva Forum, and they represent families who don't necessarily believe in full prisoner exchanges. Remember, so many people here in Israeli society are divided of the consequence, when it comes to the consequence of getting these hostages out, to release so many prisoners in exchange for hostages. So many people worry about the future of the security of the state of Israel and what could happen next. Remember, the catalyst of October 7th was Yahya Sinwar. Who was he? He was the person who was released in the Gilad Shalit deal, who was exchanged at that time. And he was the mastermind behind October 7th. And so you see this repeated history, and so many people don't want it to be in the future of Israel's security again. Yet again, the importance of getting lives out of Hamas captivity is something that stands in the center core of Jews. Preserving life in any capacity is something that stays central and vital to the core of the Jewish people. And that's one of the reasons why there is such a mass fight to get these people out, because they are alive. We know that these hostages are alive. It's just a matter of how they will come out, what politics are at stake to get them out, and who could be the person to get the remaining 58 people out, including the bodies that still remain in there. Kalev?
Right, and also some context that you're referring to the 58 the total number of living hostages and those that the IDF believes they have enough evidence to conclude that they are no longer alive. But there's another number. We're being very careful here not to mention the number of those we believe are still alive, because just really in the past week, this is another issue that has arisen, whether that number is, for example, the 24 that was initially given, 21, a number that's been floated, and we've heard offhand comments, for example, from President Trump, from Sarah Netanyahu, suggested this also is posing a challenge for the hostage families at this time, how to deal with that issue.
Absolutely, and every single moment counts. I'll go back to my comment about Hersh Goldberg-Polin. They say that every minute mattered of his life to get these hostages out. Sagi Dekelhen, another American citizen who was just released a few months ago, said that he counted the seconds. There were millions of seconds he was in Hamas captivity, and every single one matters. I want to give more context to EDAN Alexander. In recent days, we actually heard, according to Hamas, but was not verified by the IDF, is that airstrikes by the Israeli Air Force might have hit a nearby area where EDAN was being kept. They said one of his captors was actually killed, and they didn't know the whereabouts of EDAN Alexander. That goes to show you, who knows what Hamas is saying is real, right? They said the whereabouts of him are unknown. His family actually made comments saying that we're not going to comment on any of this until we know from the IDF things are verified. And look, he is supposed to be coming home today. So there's a lot of misinformation Hamas puts out. We've had incidents back in November of 2023 where Hamas said hostages were killed in airstrikes, yet they actually walked out on their own 2 feet, specifically Hana Katsir. She was one of them. And so now we're at a time where we really believe this is happening. John Alexander is coming out. Remember, this emotion is so strong. This happened not even 24 hours ago. I don't even think it was 12 hours ago where the public found out EDAN Alexander would be coming home today. His parents hopped on a flight as fast as they could. They likely will be arriving a little bit after he is released. Depending on the timing, of course, everything is subject to change. He has an adoptive family here in Israel. He was a lone soldier. He was assigned a family to take him in as their own. And so it's someone that he grew close to. We don't know if they will be greeting him once he arrives in Israel or if they will wait for his family to get to the border as well in the first stages. We know from the past hostage releases that these hostages, once they're handed over from the Red Cross, the IDF then brings them into Israel. They're then brought to a special military base where they get initial health screening. They get something very specific to eat, not to bother their stomach too much, because a lot of them haven't eaten in months a full meal. So there's very specific protocol, and then he would likely be brought to a hospital as well. So that's the protocol that we know as of now for EDAN Alexander. Kalev?
Right, and I should add, there have been reports just in the past few hours, I don't want to give them too much credence because it sounds pretty incredible to me, which is suggesting the possibility that EDAN Alexander, after he'd be released, would at one point then go with Steve Witkoff to Qatar to meet with President Trump there in Qatar. I have difficulty believing that that would be the case for this young man after what he's gone through, or the possibility that President Trump will, on his way back to the United States, make a brief stopover in Israel and meet with EDAN Alexander. We showed earlier that footage, as you talked about the signs of life we've had of EDAN Alexander. We have seen in the last basically a couple of weeks more and more of these videos being released of the remaining hostages. Clearly, of course, the family's always grateful for any sign of life, but clearly an effort. In some cases, we don't show them. Clearly, they may be made under duress, but clearly part of the psychological warfare that Hamas is conducting in order to pressure Israel to end its operation in Gaza.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember that the Palestinian people are trapped in Gaza as Hamas is making these videos underground. It shows you their priorities. It shows you that they know the power that they have while holding onto these hostages. That is what is keeping them in this game, in this war, and keeping and remaining and holding onto them, waiting for the perfect deal. You know, we know that Netanyahu has said over and over again They're trying to pressure Hamas with military pressure at this point. There's question of if that is working, although I believe the Prime Minister's office said that, the release of EDAN Alexander, a soldier, is the result of this applied military pressure that started just a few months ago. We know that there's even more plans to expand this ground offensive inside of the Gaza Strip. So many of these hostage families oppose it. That's because based off the testimony of released hostages, they say their conditions got even worse when renewed fighting began while they were still in captivity. And they described how the places where they were being held were shaking from these airstrikes. The ground was shaking. Things were collapsing near them. And it made their conditions much worse in terms of food, their starvation, even their mental state. And so, of course, like you said, and I've said before, there is a divide here in Israeli society. But on your screen right now, this is just the latest propaganda video that was released of EDAN Alexander. Remember, these propaganda videos are so complicated for the families to see. Not only are they seeing their loved one in complete distress, you can see EDAN Alexander just holding his fists. You can see the frustration in his eyes and in his words that he's using to describe what captivity is like. Why is he still here? Why can't he be home with his friends and his family? But again, it offers a sign of life, even though this is never the condition you want to see your family member in. It offers a glimpse that maybe they really are alive. Maybe they're getting through this. And to be honest, when you do see the live stream come through of these hostages walking out, you really, it's a miracle to see. And we are waiting for that feeling in Hostage Square today to say that EDAN Alexander is back in Israeli custody. We're waiting to say that. Of course, we're still waiting for all of it to unfold. Kalev?
All right, Shosh Bedrosian there in Hostage Square. And if you're just joining us on ILTV, of course, we're awaiting in the coming moments the expected release of EDAN Alexander, 21-year-old American-Israeli soldier, expected to be released by Hamas in a deal that was negotiated directly, unprecedented negotiations between Hamas and the United States. Well, joining us in studio now, we have Ruthie Bloom, senior contributing editor at the JNS News Organization. Ruthie, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
As we've been saying always, Ruthie, we have to start the conversation by noting the fact that EDAN Alexander, after 584 days, is getting his freedom. Of course, all of us in Israel and all, I would say, of the worldwide Jewish community welcoming his release, this young American who came to Israel, as we did, to serve in the IDF as a lone soldier and kidnapped, of course, on October 7, 2023. With that, though, this is a hostage release that is unlike any other. As I said before, one negotiated, unprecedented direct negotiations between the United States and Hamas, set in the context of President Trump's visit to the Middle East and what that meant entail, and other developments in recent weeks involving the Trump administration in Israel. So first of all, let's start with the hostage release. Let me get your reaction to when you heard the news that this was happening.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to add something about EDAN Alexander. He's actually Israeli, born Israeli to Israeli parents who moved to New Jersey,
and
he grew up.
New Jersey.
Right, and no, but that's also relevant. And he decided he wanted to come back to Israel and join the IDF. And then this awful thing happened to him. So I think that's also relevant. Yes, when I heard the news, of course, I was really, really happy. My feeling all along has been any hostages that get out, that's a blessing. Now, we realize that it's tricky here because Hamas is evil, but it's not stupid. And it did that. I think it was a maneuver to say, you see, we're dealing directly with Trump, and we're not going to demand anything of it. But you know, to show the Israeli protesters that, you see, you're right. If you would just end the war, you'd get all your hostages out, etc. It's a message from Hamas. And I was against direct negotiations with Hamas, but I am not against hostage releases of any kind, as long as it doesn't mean ending the war and leaving Hamas in power.
Right. Now, we should note there are reports now that that Israel is sending, or you might want to say resending, a negotiating team to Cairo to engage again in negotiations. This comes as Steve Witkoff is coming to Israel. We expect him here.
I think he landed already, as far as I know.
Okay.
Yes.
To meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Right.
Against the context of President Trump's visits to Saudi Arabia, to the United Arab Emirates, but most significantly to Qatar, who he did thank in his announcement of it last night. Your reaction?
Yes, well, I have to say, repeatedly throughout this war, many have been thanking Qatar for its role in mediating when Qatar, in fact, funds Hamas. Qatar is a terrorist entity. It's true that we don't have official enemy status relations with Qatar, but...
Well, that's a matter of...
that's a matter of opinion. Right, but I mean, there's some...
it's a matter of legal debate. We won't
right, exactly.
We won't get into that.
We won't get into that part of it, but it actually is an enemy of Israel's and of the West, and it is playing this role. It's a joke. First of all, Qatar also funds, it infiltrates in the West altogether, in universities. It spreads its money all over the place. And that's a big danger. As a matter of fact, we're hearing that it wants to give President Trump another airplane for Air Force One, et cetera. Who knows if that's accurate, but apparently Trump tweeted this. In any case, so I think it's very bad that Qatar has had a role in this, because Qatar is on Hamas's side. And so how can you mediate a hostage release when you're on Hamas's side? Egypt is yet another story. But I will say the good news about this is the following. EDAN Alexander is being released without the release of terrorists from Israeli jails and without a ceasefire. Now, the fact that we're going to negotiate and go back to what we already agreed to was a Witkoff outline that said about 10 hostages released, live hostages, maybe 7 to 10, and some deceased. We were prepared to do that a while back, and Hamas said no. The fact that Hamas is now open to it again suggests that something is moving, and suggests that Hamas maybe is afraid of this new, our threatening to launch a major ground offensive again.
Right. Ruthie, there's been definitely a growing discussion about the Trump administration, in particular President Trump's attitude towards not to Israel. I think that, without question, I think any discussion about that, President Trump has shown he is as staunch a supporter of Israel as there has been in the White House. But whether his views are, in a sense, moving away somewhat from the Netanyahu government's views. And we've seen that in the ceasefire agreement with the Houthis, now with this separate negotiation, which apparently caught Israel by surprise. What's your view on that? Because the question is also, this is going to be very important when it comes to, for example, the Iran nuclear agreement, which is being negotiated right now.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm a little skeptical about all these reports about the rift between Trump and Netanyahu, precisely because there are two groups, one in Israel and one in America, that have an interest in not only promoting such a wedge between the two leaders, but also in, almost planting it as a story, and then everyone's running with the story, and I'm not sure it's true. What we do know is that Trump and Netanyahu have very different personalities, and in this case, it's really coming out.
Is it personalities, or is it more than that because of, again, we know that President Trump wants to see some kind of grand deal made in the Middle East?
Yes, no, but I meant the difference, for example, when Trump said, okay, release all hell on Gaza if all the hostages aren't released. He said that weeks ago, and then Netanyahu did not release all hell, and the reason had to do with the hostages. So now, I don't think Trump was upset with Netanyahu for that. I think he understood it. But Trump is very impatient. He likes to get deals. He likes to get them done quickly. We all want to see peace in the Middle East, including Netanyahu. The question is, at what cost? You don't just have peace. You have to have peace through strength. Both leaders agree with that. The question is how you achieve it. Now, if Trump signs any deal with Iran, any deal, I think it'll be a bad deal. There's no deal you can make with the Islamic Republic. Now, Netanyahu, what I'm saying is they have very different characters, because Netanyahu has always been extremely cautious.
Yes.
Some people used to call him a warmonger, but in fact, he's extremely cautious. And Trump maybe want to have peace break out, but he would have had Israel listen to him, and we had just blitzed Gaza. He wouldn't have said a word. He gave us the green light to go ahead and demolish what we can in Gaza. But then Netanyahu didn't take him up on it, and we understand. We have our interests
and the lives of the hostages.
Exactly, exactly. And I think Trump understood that, but that doesn't mean he suddenly is patient. And he's moving to his own interests in the Middle East and hoping to broker all these things, which could be extremely good. But it won't be good if he has a fantasy about Qatar or Iran. That'll be very bad. Right. So we'll see. And Saudi Arabia, I mean, Netanyahu was talking before the war broke out, he was talking about, having Saudi Arabia, a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia. Question is, can we trust that? I don't know. I think right now, nobody knows. And because there's so much speculation, a lot of fake news is spreading. Right. And I don't know, I don't know more than you do exactly what's going on and whether it's exactly true. Right. Well, we can only guess.
Well, we might get some clarification in the next few days.
Yes.
President Trump had been saying that he would make an important announcement in Saudi Arabia. Joining us now is Dan Diker. He's president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Dan, are you with us?
Security and Foreign Affairs.
Security for Foreign Affairs. Thank you for correcting me.
Security and Foreign Affairs.
Security, Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Thank you.
And Foreign Affairs, just like the Knesset.
Just like the Knesset, but with a big difference, Dan. Dan, thank you for joining us. First of all, I want to get your reaction. Of course, as I've been saying throughout this broadcast, the immediate initial reaction has to be joy over the release of this courageous young man, EDAN Alexander, after 584 days of captivity. But the circumstances of his release are unprecedented, these direct negotiations for the first time between the United States and Hamas. So I do want to get your initial reaction, thoughts to that.
Initial reaction and thoughts are it's always great when a human life is saved. Here, Israel has been pushing for the release of EDAN Alexander for a long time. Here you have a very complex situation because you have Iran sending out all kinds of tweets of disinformation regarding EDAN and regarding what they charge as Netanyahu's attempt to prevent his release. That was a tweet issued about 5 minutes ago. The Iranians have been doing a great job at deception and disinformation warfare around this issue of the release of Alexander. I quite agree with what Ruthie has said on the program now, and that I think the concerns regarding an apparent deepening rift between Israel and the United States is being completely overstated. We know that from former Ambassador Friedman. We know that from Ambassador Huckabee, that these rumors about all kinds of statements that are apparently going to be made in surprise announcements are just simply untrue. And the United States and Israel are clearly ironclad partners. President Trump proved his pro-Israel bona fides, not only in 2017, having taken actions that no U.S. president has taken in favor of Israel to help Israel strengthen its own security, but certainly in 2025, Prime Minister Netanyahu was the first foreign leader to visit the White House, and 8 weeks later, he was back in the White House for additional talks. So clearly, the president has said clearly that Israel and America are aligned on the major issue, is that Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. Clearly, at the same time, this is classic Trump, keep everybody in suspense. This is the way the president has worked. This is his out-of-the-box approach to the Middle East. This is a president that wrote the bestseller Art of the Deal. And I think that Israel we should all drink a cold glass of water and not jump every time that the administration does something that's a little bit out of line with what our acute needs are right now at this particular moment.
Well, let me ask you about that, because the Netanyahu government did object when it was earlier revealed that Adam Boehler, the Middle East negotiator, had met with a Hamas official. Now it turns out that he was involved once again in direct negotiations with Hamas that led to release of EDAN Alexander. In fact, he's coming on the plane with the Alexander family to Israel. So should the Netanyahu government no longer have any objections to there being direct dialogue between Hamas and the U.S.?
The Hamas file is a very sensitive file, and it does require a close coordination, collaboration between the two powers. No question about it. Because the world is watching, beginning with the Islamic Republic of Iran, is what happens in Gaza. If Israel doesn't defeat the Hamas in Gaza, which means destroy their military terror and political control over the Strip, it's going to unleash a not only a regional but a global spate of violence by the radicals and the extremists in the radical Islamic camp. So the stakes are very, very high. We still have 58 hostages. If EDAN Alexander comes back, it'll be 58 hostages, dead and alive, that still need to be released. And right now, what we're seeing from a cognitive standpoint is a Hamas success in what appears to be sidelining Israel and giving a gift to the United States, if you will, or a gesture to the United States in releasing this dual citizen. This is very problematic from a Middle Eastern point of view, because in the Middle East, how things look is more important than what's actually done on the ground. So this really does require a very strong coordination between Israel and the United States. And in this particular situation, the perception is that Israel is not in control of the narrative, that the Hamas is in control of the narrative, that the Hamas is actually now some sort of legitimate partner, if you will, opposite the United States, and is doing a deal over Israel's head. That perception is a tool of war. It's a tool of war of the Iranian regime. It's a tool of war of the Hamas. And that's exactly what the two enemies of Israel and the West are doing. They're trying to drive a perceptual stake through these two great allies and within Israeli society itself. So that is why that very much requires a close coordination between Israel and the United States. And all of these recent surprises, the U.S. direct talks with the Iranian regime, the U.S. Declarations on the Houthis, as well as its approach now to Gaza, apparently have created concerns in Israel. But I do think at the bottom line is, Kalev, we have to look at the record of the United States under the Trump administration. Has been very, very strong on Israel, and I'm quite optimistic that just as Ruthie says, a lot of these rumors are way, way overplayed, and they're being driven by the Iranian regime bot avatar farms and disinformation campaign, which is a strategic campaign.
Now, one decision, as I said right before we went to you, there are reports now that Israel is resending its negotiating team to Cairo to engage in hostage negotiations. This was at a time when many anticipated that immediately following President Trump's visit to the region at the end of this week, Israel would begin its major operation in the Gaza Strip. So I ask you, Dan, and also Ruthie, if it's hard to imagine in the next few days that negotiations could come to a conclusion, that would mean to some delay. Should the Netanyahu government delay that operation while negotiations are going on, or should it try to see if it could proceed with the operations if talks are continuing?
Well, I can answer first, Dan, if you will allow me.
Danny, stay with us. Ruthie, yes.
Go ahead, Ruthie.
Okay. I think that Israel is going to decide whether, for example, if Hamas agrees to release, let's say, 10 live hostages in the near future in exchange for a month-and-a-half ceasefire, as we had in the past, that kind of deal, then I think Israel would say, okay, we're going to hold off on that big ground operation. If not, because at the moment we haven't gone full force, we're still pausing. So
exactly right. And what if that pause? What if the U.S. is asking, and it looks like they are because the negotiations have apparently resuming, to keep that pause going while those talks are happening?
Maybe because at the moment it's not that there's no warfare. There is no ceasefire at the moment. It's just not the big operation.
Absolutely.
And so maybe what we'll do is keep it on a low flame while negotiations are going on, as opposed to launching the major operation that we're threatening and for which we amassed so many reservists again. At the moment, it's on a low flame, and maybe that's what will keep it until Hamas agrees to release some hostages in exchange for an actual ceasefire for several weeks or something. Except the one thing we cannot do is agree to end the war. We need to win the war. And this is the biggest problem within Israeli society right now, is the debate between the side that says we have to win the war and the other side that says no, the hostages and end the war and that's it, and leave Hamas where it is, and at a later date deal with Hamas. But we can't do that because, as Dan pointed out, this affects the whole world, because all this does is show all the terrorists that all they have to do is kidnap people, rape people, behead them, and kidnap them, and then they get to call the shots. We cannot allow that anymore.
All right, but we should note again, the hostage families are saying going that operation would potentially put at risk.
And they're right. They're but by the way, the hostage families are right. Make no mistake. Those hostages are at risk, with or without it. And yes, they're more at risk if we start exploding buildings and tunnels. Of course they are. And they're also more at risk of their captors executing them. Absolutely. We know that, which is why we haven't won this war in so long, why it's now more than a year and a half. That's exactly right, because we care about them and we don't want to do that. All right? But at some point, they're right, and if I were among them, I would hope that I would say, okay, maybe I would want to sell the country down the tubes for my child, maybe, I don't know, but I have a different consideration. I have son-in-law who fought in Gaza the whole time looking for the hostages. We all have a stake in this, but the bigger picture is that we cannot allow Hamas to stay in power. And yes, we agree that nobody denies that this is putting the hostage at risk, but some people believe it's a greater chance of getting them out. Some people believe that. I don't know. I'm not a military person, and I don't know.
Yeah, and what about delaying
I think there's a bigger strategic constraint here that we haven't mentioned yet in our discussion, and that's called the U.S.-Saudi engagement. There is a strategic deal that is being cooked under or baked underneath this entire strategic and tactical war that we've had with Hamas since October 7th and clearly before, and that is that President Trump and Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, are looking to build a new Middle East based on technology, over oil and gas, and the Saudis definitely want a cessation of hostilities in Gaza. That is what I'm very sure that is what they told the administration. They're not looking for a Palestinian state, but they're looking for quiet on the Gaza front. That puts them in direct conflict with what Israel's strategy is and has to be, which is the total destruction of Hamas and its removal from power. And this is exactly where ironically, the Hamas, the United States, and the Saudis are really on the same side on this particular point, because Israel must expand its operation in order to put Hamas on its heels and remove them from power. While at the same time, I think what Trump, the major announcement that he wants to make, I think, is in a major advancement in normalization with Saudi Arabia that ultimately, in his view, would include Israel, but it would require a cessation of hostilities, which is why I think there's a real concern in Israel that any kind of a 50-day ceasefire would crack the momentum of Israel's of a potential and what appears to be an imminent Israeli military campaign to maximum pressure against the Hamas. This is the strategic constraint that Israel is facing that I think is being is evolving on the Saudi-U.S. side.
Right, but then Prime Minister and Ruthie, Prime Minister Netanyahu is finding himself, in a sense, between the proverbial rock and a hard place. Because, as you say, I mean, if this is the U.S. desire, President Trump's desire, we used to say that the U.S. was the #1 ally of Israel. I think you could almost say it's almost the only ally of Israel in the current, in its current circumstances. So how far can Prime Minister Netanyahu go if, in fact, this is what the scenario you laid out is what President Trump wants to see, certainly in the coming short term, to allow that process to go ahead?
Well, I think Ruthie said it very well. We've got to kind of square the circle and and continue our military maximum pressure without toppling the apple cart that is being pushed down the road on a regional level between the United States and Saudi Arabia. It's a very, very complex situation, and I think that the concern in Israel stemmed from the fact that when President Trump just weeks ago said all hell's going to break loose in Gaza, and that Gaza should have a relocation plan for all of its citizens, while the Hamas is destroyed and then Gaza is rebuilt. That whole potential operative plan has now been sort of shaken because of some of these surprise deals that have been actions that have been taken by the administration. So it's an enormously complex chessboard right now. But ultimately, Israel is going to have to do what is in its own national security interest right now, and that is, it absolutely cannot leave the Hamas in power. That would be disastrous for the United States. It would be disastrous for the region, and it would basically chalk up an Israeli loss, which the country absolutely cannot afford to take.
Ruthie, prior to speaking with you and Dan, we had on us former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Orin, who said if there are demands from President Trump that Prime Minister Netanyahu feels he cannot concede to, he may be in a position of going to calling early elections in Israel. I want to get your feeling, because he also has his domestic. You mentioned the demands of the hostage family. That is a domestic political constraint. Yes. For Prime Minister Netanyahu, but he also has those in his cabinet, especially National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who want Israel immediately to go and proceed with this military operation, not to go into hostages, and some even to the point of threatening to bring down the government. So what are the political options for Prime Minister Netanyahu? Is going to elections one?
Possibly. I don't think that he'll call for elections unless the government if the government falls, there have to be elections. But I don't think at this moment he's calling for elections. I think that we know about Israel's internal strife. What we didn't talk about is the United States' internal strife in the inside the administration.
Okay, so talk about that.
And that's relevant to this, because you have a split, including in Trump's inner circle, between the isolationists, and then some of the, and in the Republican Party, some of the extreme isolationists or anti-Semites even, like the Tucker Carlson fans. And you have, but you see, Witkoff and Bowler. By the way, one thing I'd like to say about Bowler, it wasn't just that Israel objected to direct negotiations with Hamas. Let's not forget what Bowler and Witkoff both said. What did Bowler say about Hamas? Bowler said, these are very nice people. Some of them are very good people. And he said, Qatar is a lovely... and now you have a guy, that's the guy you want talking to Hamas, who says they're lovely people. It was outrageous, okay? And that was the anger. It wasn't just anger in Israel. I know there were many Americans who were angry about it, and
some senior figures in the Republican Party, some
and
senators,
so what we're seeing,
Tom Cotton, these
right,
figures
and
such
I
as these.
think what we see now is whatever deals are going to happen. For example, a deal with Iran, which I think would be a disaster. As I said, any deal. Not that there's a good
any deal that Iran would accept.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
It will be a bad deal. And by the way, speaking of Saudi Arabia, another tricky situation here is that though Saudi Arabia is Iran's enemy, Saudi Arabia is now saying, no, they don't want Israel to bomb Iran, etc. There's so many moving parts here that you'd say, why does you'd think Saudi Arabia would want Israel to bomb Iran? So I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that you also have Congress. It's not just the administration in Washington. There are moves that Congress will have to approve. And here's when you're going to see splits there as well. So it's not that cut and dried. And my feeling is that because Trump is so sui generis, and you never know what he's going to do. He comes up with this, comes up with that. Everybody says he's crazy. I don't think he's crazy. I think he is like, he's got some kind of genius in spite of himself. He has done many incredible things, especially in his, as I said, for Israel in the first administration.
Absolutely.
And then now he talks on both sides of his mouth, etc. And so what happens is we all get hysterical. We all start to analyze it. What does it mean? What does that mean? What did he say? What did he say? And then the next day he says something else. So I think the only thing we can do right now is wait and see. And I think that Netanyahu is... also, he's waiting, and I think he is way more in touch with people in Washington than we imagine. It's not only Trump. There are members of Congress. There are other people in the administration. There's Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's not on the same page as Steve Witkoff on many issues. So I think we're going to see, we have to see which side wins inside.
I want to bring Dan into this, Dan, because Ruthie says Israel, the Netanyahu government specifically, will have to wait and see. But some of the criticism of the Netanyahu government, by the way, both on the left and also on the right in Israel, is that it's waiting and seeing rather than being proactive one way or the other, and is being caught kind of flat-footed by these surprises that are being sprung by President Trump here. So let me ask you this, whether Benjamin Netanyahu has to be more proactive in giving out. I mean, some of his critics says he hasn't given his vision of how, for example, a post-Hamas Gaza would look like, what the future in the Middle East, and he's being reactive. And of course, as Ruthie says, one thing you can't be with President Trump is necessarily reactive, because he is going to go ahead. He is not going to wait on you.
Correct. First of all, there are 2 points here. Number one, the administration itself is suffering from a certain kind of operational chaos. I think one of the outputs, or one of the outcomes of President Trump's art of the deal approach to the Middle East is that not everyone in the administration is on the same page from a policy standpoint. So I think there's a disorganization in the administration between the State Department and the White House and the offices of national intelligence, national security. They moved Mike Waltz out. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is now an acting head of national intelligence. So there is a certain lack of coordination within the American side that makes all of this current moment and these surprises a little bit more chaotic by nature. Now, having said that, I spoke to, I'll tell you who it is, actually, is a JCFA fellow, David Wormser, Dr. Dave Wormser, who was former Vice President Cheney's man in the Middle East during the second Bush administration. And Dave said the other day, Israel's got to pursue what's called the Trump green light strategy. And that means that when the president gives Israel a green light, you've got to drive the car, and you've got to drive it through quickly, because, as you said, Khaled, very well, you never know when the yellow and the red light from the administration is going to appear, or whether the administration is going to take a sharp left turn or a sharp right turn itself. So that Israel really has no time to waste in pursuing its national security and its acute diplomatic interests, and cannot wait for the U.S. to take the lead on these things, because, as we've seen, the U.S. has its own interests. Let's be very clear, and I'll finish the point by saying this here, Khaled. President Trump sees $1 trillion in front of him, coming from Qatar, coming from UAE, coming from Saudi Arabia, $1 trillion potential investment in the United States. This comes at a time when Trump's approval numbers are low. The American economy is fragile. Trump needs quick wins. And as you both said, he's an impatient guy. He wants results. He wants to stop wars, and he wants to win the peace. He wants to go from the gates of hell to the gates of heaven. And Netanyahu has a different timeline. Israel has a different set of major threats it's facing. So, yes, Israel's got to pursue that green light strategy and do what it needs to do, and don't wait for a moment, because the United States is taking, in contrast to the former administration and past administration, it's taking the initiative in the Middle East, and it's taking it very, very quickly.
Right. And let me ask you also, in terms of, you raised the United States, Ruthie, because Dan has said that President Trump has domestic issues that are preoccupying. Israel does have its allies in the United States, in the administration, in the Republican Party, even to some degree, still some among the Democratic Party. Of course, there's the progressive wing, but I'm talking about more in the sort of the mainstream centrist thing.
Two of them. Two Democrats.
Well, Democrats.
Two to name two.
Okay, two Democrats.
Richie Torres and Fetterman.
Okay, Democrats will disagree, but that's fair enough. But the point is, to what degree should Prime Minister Netanyahu speak out and speak more toward the American public, the evangelical community, and mobilize them in terms of getting, this is what Israel's red lines are, and Israel has to stand by them, even if Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Emirates are giving $1 trillion into the basically American pocketbook.
Well, ironically, I don't think that Netanyahu needs to mobilize them. They're mobilized on their own. And I'll tell you, speaking years ago, I remember speaking to an evangelical Christian and saying to him, Tell me, doesn't it get on your nerves when so many Israelis say that, are wary of Christians and they're trying to convert them? Whatever. Isn't it annoying to you that you're on Israel's side and the Jewish Americans are not in that same respect? And he said, no, because we don't support Israel to make friends with Jews or Israelis. We do it because we think it's the right thing. We believe in it for our own reasons. Okay. Now, the reason I said that is that those Christians are mobilized on behalf of Israel. The pro-Israel camp in the Republican Party is already mobilized. In fact, they'll be critical of Netanyahu if he capitulates too much. I think that what is true, however, there's no question. I don't know this for a fact. I'm assuming that there are many conversations, backroom conversations, with members of Congress to make sure that, let's say, that no bad deal with Iran is signed.
Well, I want to say some Republican senators have gone public with that. Senator Tom Cotton was one who, for example, was publicly.
So, so what we're seeing here, we don't know which, there's a tug of war going on. It's not only in the administration, but in general in the inner circle. I mean, you have President Trump's son, Don Jr., on a different page from, let's say, I would say even his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. You have a weird situation there. As I said, Marco Rubio isn't on the same page as Steve Witkoff. In some areas they are, but in some they're not. And here's another problem with the United States, and that goes for every administration. They don't understand Arab culture. They don't understand Islam. They don't understand. So the art of the deal is all well and good, but it's incomplete when it comes to the Middle East. And that's been a problem all along with the United States, not grasping that the rest of the world is not like it.
Well, I want to get to Dan Diker, Dan who has dedicated a lot of his life to understanding the Middle East and the Arab mind, and get your response to what Ruthie's saying.
I was muted. If you can just give me just a quick heads up, I was muted during that. I couldn't hear what you were saying.
I'm sorry that Ruthie was saying there is a problem, and I think you were referring to people necessarily, for example, maybe like Steve Witkoff or whatever, who are coming to the region and their only experience in dealing with it would be on a business level with the sort of top level people in the Gulf, and do not understand the greater currents within the Middle East and within the Arab body, and Islam and the Arab body politic. And that is a failing of the administration, as opposed to those officials, of which we did see more of in the first Trump administration, who did have more experience in dealing with the region. And as someone himself who has been very active, I want to get your response to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned was from former Professor Bernard Lewis of Princeton University, who said that the biggest mistake of the West when it comes to Islam in the Near East is that Western interlocutors, what they mirror, meaning they reflect what they think Middle Eastern political cultures are thinking and our enemies are thinking. And I think Ruth is absolutely right. The mistake that American administrations, and I must say Israel, has also made, is that we frequently act without really understanding Iranian negotiating behaviors, for example, or the negotiating behaviors, the political culture of our enemies. If we understood the way they thought and how they thought and why they're attacking, and the fact that we're facing jihad, we're not facing a political problem. We've been facing a holy war for decades. And, when the United States sends special envoys who have absolutely no background in Middle East, that don't understand Arab or Islamic political culture, you end up getting statements like, the Hamas are really nice guys. I'd like to have them at my dinner table. Or, the Iranians were very kind to me when I came in. This is exactly what the enemy wants to hear, and exactly what drives the enemy to create differences within Israel and between Israel and its greatest allies. That is exactly what's going on right now. They're driving us nuts within ourselves, thinking that there are massive differences between us and the United States. That is a strategy of war by our enemies, and I think that it's absolutely correct to say that anyone who deals with the Arab Muslim Middle East, or certainly the Iranian regime, has got to understand their negotiating and their wartime behaviors before responding or engaging.
Right. I do want to remind our viewers that we are here in a special broadcast awaiting the release of EDAN Alexander, the 21-year-old American-Israeli soldier who's being held hostage from Gaza and who is expected to be released we believe, in the coming hours. We don't have exact information on that. Unlike previous hostage releases, there's not been a specific time set. There will be no ceremony that we've seen, thankfully, that we have seen, these obscene pageants that we've seen in the past. We will most likely see a handover, perhaps even not in front of the cameras, by Hamas. We're not even sure who the mediator is here in this case. He will then be taken to Ra'im Air Force Base and later to Ichalav Hospital. Let's go to our Shosh Bedrosian, who is at Hostage Square for that. And Shosh, we're still waiting here for some sign that this hostage release is going underway. Just fill us in on what you're hearing there in Hostage Square. Okay, I'm sorry. We're having some sound issues. I do hope we'll go back to Shosh as soon as we do have her. Again, we are waiting for the release of, or some sign that the process has begun to release EDAN Alexander, where he will be then taken to the Ra'im, as I said before, the Ra'im military base. And we should say that this hostage release, which is the first in a while, Ruthie, is going. You talked about. I'm sorry. Yeah. Do we have Shosh Bedrosian in Hostage Square? No, we're still having some sound issues. I'm sorry for that. There is going to be increased pressure on the government, on Prime Minister Netanyahu, to move forward with some kind of hostage deal, given the fact that, and as you said before, this may or obviously would have been Hamas's aim here. Talk about the impact this is likely to have on that discussion in Israel, the release of EDAN Alexander today.
Okay, so first of all, it's interesting to say this will put pressure on Netanyahu for a hostage deal. Netanyahu has been willing to make hostage deal all along, and he's done it.
I am talking about an immediate deal under conditions in which he may not feel comfortable with.
Well, again, I would say
I'm not saying he'll do so. I'm saying he has been put pressure on him.
He has been under pressure. Not only, first of all, it's not all the families of the hostages. Let's be clear, there are some, but the people putting pressure on him to get all the hostages now are saying end the war. That he cannot do. So the question is, how far is he willing to go? How long a ceasefire is he willing to allow for while getting this many or that many hostages out, all right? Now, there's this paradox here because we all want them all out. But then some are saying you can't have a selection. That's like the Nazis. You can't say only 10. What about the rest of them? And what about... Now, my feeling all along has been, obviously we want them all out. And the best thing would have been an Entebbe raid where we got 251 out on October 8th by ourselves. That would have been terrific. But we couldn't. And we haven't been able to. So my feeling always is, whoever you can get out in any way you can, it's a human life, go for it. And that's why I supported each deal, even though I had to, bite my tongue about how I feel about it, about the policy of it. But still, every hostage you can get out is worth it. Now, that brings me to the other issue that today people have been really raising, how unfair it is that EDAN Alexander has a U.S. passport and therefore he gets out. Well, many hostages. Well,
let's get some more perspective on the hostages, because joining us now is Ruthie Orin. She is the cousin of Tal Halimi, who was one of the hostages who is believed to have been killed, and his remains are still being held in Gaza. Ruthie, are you with us? Uri.
I am. I can
All
hear
right,
you
I'm sorry, Uri Gordon, who I have spoken with in the past, and I apologize for that. This is a day, as I've been saying all along, certainly there has to be joy for the release of this hostage, EDAN Alexander, for his family, for the people of Israel, for the Jewish people. But the circumstances here are quite different from any we've seen in any hostage deal before. So I want to get your feeling as someone with this connection, of course, with Tal Halimi, who's still there.
Of course. So you were saying that it feels unjust or unfair that EDAN is getting out, but it's not really the truth. I don't feel it's unfair. Every life saved is a life worth saving. So I have nothing but joy that I know EDAN is coming back and he is getting his life back and his family is getting their lives back because, they've been a part of my extended family for the past year and a half. But I think what's really concerning, and I think that's what many people are addressing, is that we don't feel that another country should take care of the Israeli hostages. It's not about fairness. It's about Zionism. It's about the reason that EDAN, instead of going to college, chose to come to Israel and go to the military. Him and Omer Neutra and the other soldiers that were born and raised here, and they deserve to be back home as much as EDAN. And so I'm not even speaking about fairness. I'm speaking about what is Israel about. Israel is the land of the Jewish people, and Israel needs to take care of its own people. It's not the responsibility of the U.S. And of course, I couldn't be more grateful to President Trump and Special Envoy Witkoff that has been incredibly adamant on where they stand when it comes to the hostage crisis. And they've been talking about this over and over again. They've been speaking about the living hostages. They've been speaking about the deceased hostages. And we know they're committed. And what I truly hope is that when Witkoff meets with Netanyahu, and actually very soon, just right over here, we're right where it's going to happen, he is going to present to Netanyahu a solution for this region. Because as we've seen, war does not bring hostages back, and it will not solve our problems. And I think President Trump has shown that he is eager to do exactly what he said he would, to end wars and make pacts, make agreements. And I hope this is what they're presenting to Netanyahu.
And how would you want to see, if that is the scenario, Prime Minister Netanyahu respond? What do you want to see result from today's events in terms of the policy of the Israeli government moving forward?
I want to see Netanyahu grab this opportunity in both hands and saying, yes, I think we have hope for a better future for this region. Yes, I want to see the Saudis be the patron of Hamas and not Qatar that has sponsored terrorism over the years. Yes, we think that we Israelis don't deserve the suffering and the misery we've been through this year and 7 months. And if the U.S. administration can harness our allies in the region, including the Saudis, including the Emirates, of course, including the Egyptians, and now we hear maybe Lebanon, maybe Syria, we are talking about an opportunity for a completely different Middle East. And I think that the U.S. administration has recognized that the first domino stone to make this happen is bring all 59 hostages back home, end the war, and rebuild the Israeli spirit, rebuild Gaza, and bring prosperity to this region. We deserve better. We just deserve better.
Right. Let me ask you, and this is a difficult subject to bring up. Just the other day, of course, Israel succeeded in bringing the remains of a fallen soldier in Syria who fell during the first Lebanon war. Decades. This would have been almost 42 years. 42 years. Of course, there is a priority for those hostages that are believed to still be alive, and even that number is disputed. But I want to get a word of someone, because Tal is believed to have been killed, perhaps concerns over the fact of getting the remains back. As we know, in Gaza, that has been particularly problematic even to this day. Your concerns about that?
You're absolutely right. And what you've just asked is our worst nightmare. I don't see how the family survived 42 years without any certainty. We don't want to wait for 42 years to bring Tal back home. Tal is the fourth generation to the founders of the kibbutz. His grandparents and my grandparents founded the kibbutz when it was just a sand dune. He was born there, he was raised there, and he died defending it. He chose to raise his kids there under rocket fire. The only final resting place that he deserves is the cemetery of the kibbutz. Now, you've asked about the living hostages. You know, we're Jewish. Of course, we need to save lives first, before anything else. Bring back the living hostages, no doubt. I just don't think we need to prioritize. We just need to bring everybody back. All 58 remaining hostages after EDAN, they all must be back, and not in 40 years. They need to be back now.
All right, Orin, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we welcome the release of EDAN Alexander, but we, of course, must continue, Israel must continue fighting in whatever way for the release of all hostages who are both living and past, including Tal Chaimi. Thank you for joining us on ILTV to share with us. I don't know if Dan Diker is still with us, but I would like, or Ruthie, I want you to get your response. Obviously, you could... Okay. Dan, I want to get both of you your response to what we have just heard, hearing from someone, of course, connected personally with the hostage family.
Okay, so first of all, the issue of when he said that Israel has to take care of its own, and this is a Zionist issue, and, you know, it shouldn't be that America had to do this. But let's remember that throughout this hostage crisis, everybody was turning to foreign leaders. We had Putin help release hostages, Russian people with dual Russian citizenship. There's nothing wrong. Many Israelis have dual citizenship. I mean, that's just the nature of Israel, people who come to live here from another country. And I see no problem with that. It's interesting that precisely because he has an American passport, this became an issue in the last couple of days. We've been hearing people talk about that. I didn't hear complaints about that.
I do think there are historical resonances in terms of people, Jews, I don't want to go back into in history, getting sort of preferential treatment if they, for example, would have had an American passport. And or terrorist hostage situations.
No, right, but that's not Israel's fault. My issue is that my issue was that it's being portrayed today, as I've been reading and hearing about it.
Yes.
That somehow, you know, this is Netanyahu's fault. That look, it's true. So Trump did it on behalf.
The criticism was related to the criticism that has been that the government and Prime Minister Netanyahu has been more reactive rather than proactive in this case.
Oh, well, that's true. But my issue is that he's been more reactive than proactive when it comes to blitzing Gaza, and it's because of the hostages. I would like once in a while to hear somebody say, wow, that's the reason we haven't won the war yet. The reason is that Netanyahu cares about the hostages, not that he wants to kill them. Okay, that's the way I feel, because there have been times when I think he's been too careful. Obviously, that's a terrible thing to say when you know that hostages could be killed. Long ago, many Israelis stopped saying too many Palestinians were killed. Okay, that used to be the issue was we shouldn't be bombing because we're killing innocent Palestinians. I know now, even people on the left who have stopped talking about that. The only issue...
There are still Israelis who are talking about that.
There are, but I'm saying that the main focus right now, the main focus is not killing the hostages and not, you know, which we all feel. But let's be real, it's because of that we haven't been able to win the war swiftly. It's because of that Netanyahu has been overly cautious, we could say. And now, you mentioned Ben Gvir and Smotrich as being, you know, these, you know, they're the extreme right of his coalition.
No, I didn't say. All I said is that those are the figures who have said that they want to. They want the war to continue at full force, irregardless of other considerations.
Absolutely. Now, I don't entirely agree with that because of the hostages, but I understand it. I think that they're right. The trouble is that everyone gets angry when they hear that because it sounds as though they don't care about the lives of the hostages. I don't think that's true. I don't think they don't care about the lives. In fact, in the previous hostage releases, when either one of them tweeted, you know, welcome home, we're so delighted, the whole internet went crazy saying, you hypocrite, you didn't agree to this deal and all that. And I don't think the two are contradictory. I think you can be extremely happy for each human life who's rescued and yet still say we're in this terrible catch-22. I don't know the solution to this, honestly, because I also feel that we need to rescue the hostages. As I said, my fantasy was all along that we would have some big operation and rescue them all, right?
We have to relegate that to the realm of fantasy.
Exactly, although we did have one such rescue operation, two actually.
Right.
Yes, no, it is the realm of fantasy, but now we're stuck with this, and therefore I'm saying the fact that EDAN Alexander has an American passport, thank God, because Trump is getting him out. Okay. So I say thank God for that.
Well, I do want to go, if Dan is still with us, I do want to also go back to some of the comments that young man said, because some of them were quite interesting. And as he said before, he said for him it's a Zionist issue. These should be, development should be done by Israel, and it seems like in some ways it's ceding that responsibility for Israeli soldiers. And it is, let us just say, these circumstances are unprecedented, and they are creating potentially precedents going forward. I mean, any U.S. government now can negotiate with Hamas because of the precedent that has now been set here. But specifically on his point that he feels that this is something the Israeli government should be handling. It shouldn't necessarily be at the initiative of the Trump administration, for example, initiating this hostage release today.
Kalev, let's notice the thrust of the comments of Tal Haime's relative was basically laid at the footsteps of Israel, as if Israel is responsible for the 10/7 massacre, kidnapping, rape, and torture against it. As if Israel can just, what is the slogan? Bring them home now. As if Israel can act unilaterally against one of the world's new incarnations of Nazi Germany, ISIS, and Al Qaeda in a bottle. This is exactly the enemy's strategy: is to lay at the feet of the victim the DNA of villain, to do this inversion of legitimacy. And we have to be aware of that. We have to stay united. All of a sudden, the relative of Tal is now beginning to question the whole underpinnings of Zionism, because Israel has not been able to either negotiate or locate the remaining hostages in one of the world's most there's no other way of saying, barbarian, evil, enemies of the free world. So we have to be very clear about the type of enemy that we're facing, and not to allow what we said a little bit earlier in the program, this type of Iranian-driven Hamas cognitive warfare in order to refashion Israel, which is the victim of this horrific invasion and massacre, really unprecedented in a 24-hour period in modern political history, to refashion us not as victim of it, but as villain, because we haven't been able to release all the hostages opposite this ISIS, Al Qaeda, Nazi regime. It's a very important point. Israel's done everything it can. It continues to do everything it can. The Hamas are an incorrigible enemy, and Israel's doing everything it can to defeat this enemy and bring the hostages home. But let's remember who the enemy is. It's not Israel. It's the Iranian-backed Hamas.
Right, but let me ask you, you both have raised, you said Israel is doing everything it's possible to defeat this enemy, but Ruthie, you've raised the option that the government has not been able to do everything that's possible, legitimate perhaps for certain constraints, both internally, domestically, the lives of the hostages, but also internationally. Israel still is dependent on international support. This is a country that still does not have an industry to manufacture sufficient arms to sustain the kind of multi-front war. We've seen that, and actually that's been a criticism that's been made, regardless of political considerations, that Israel does not have a domestic arms industry big enough to be totally self-sufficient to meet the military challenges it is. So it is dependent not just potentially on the United States, but perhaps on other international players as well.
Well, that's why Netanyahu has ordered the defense industry to start manufacturing more, and has said, look, we need to rely less on outside help.
That takes years.
Obviously. But it's not that I think he isn't doing enough. I'm saying that the thing he would have to do, there is one area that I think he hasn't done enough, And there, I'm not sure that Israel has the technical capability. I'm not sure. And that is attacking Iran. Now, we did do a very successful attack on its air defenses. But because of that, I said, okay, they're vulnerable now. This is the time to strike. And we didn't. And I don't know the reason for that. Why is it? Did Trump constrain us or not? I'm not sure. Or is it because
it could be multiple reasons?
Right, and that we don't have the proper bunker busters, whatever it is. Okay, but that's the one area where Gaza is concerned. It's not that he's not doing enough. It's that to do enough to win this war, he would have to say, we're going to try our best not to kill the hostages, but we can't promise. And he won't say that. And he should be thanked by all the people who are concerned for the lives of the hostages for that. Okay, he won't say, look, too late, too bad. We have to win this war, and let's hope we find the hostages, but if not, they're all dead. He's not going to say that. All right, and that is when he has done everything he can. He has had ceasefires and releasing bloodthirsty terrorists who have already offended. Okay, so now this is a situation, as you said, it's an unprecedented situation. But the one thing we can't do is lose this war because, and whatever the hostage families say, we cannot afford to lose this war because then you're in danger, I'm in danger. And by the way, there are hostage families who said, look, I have 4 kids. One is a hostage in Gaza. What about my others? They're just at risk of being kidnapped as soon as, if we lose this war. And it's not only in Israel, it's all over the world. You cannot reward them for October 7th. We cannot do it. So I don't know what we can do other than what we're doing right now because we don't want to kill the hostages.
Okay, but okay. I do want to go to Dan, since you did raise Iran and Dan did do it, because that is the greater context is when this is happening. And as Ruthie simply said, there are those who believe that Israel simply could not be able to take out Iran's nuclear facilities on its own without U.S. support or cooperation, or perhaps even potentially defend itself fully against an Iranian counterattack, which we saw the United States do in the past under the Biden administration. Not 100% clear if the Trump doctrine now in the Middle East includes that. And I want to get your feeling on that. This is not a theoretical issue, Dan, because as you said, even as we are sitting here in the studio, there are negotiations going on between Iran and the United States on a new nuclear agreement, one that is you potentially might find it difficult to live with. But the question is what Israel is going to be able to do about that when, in fact, it is at the stage where it is so dependent on the United States and specifically the Trump administration.
Well, clearly, Israel's hands are being tied if there's any kind of deal with the Iranian regime, because you can't sign a deal with evil. You simply can't. This is a radical, extremist, eschatological regime that is operating, that has been operating to destroy Israel and, by the way, to destroy America, as it stated in 1979. This is a regime that's murdered hundreds of Americans over the years. We remember 1983 in Lebanon, its proxy Hezbollah murdered 241 American servicemen, and they've been murdering Americans ever since. This is a regime that we cannot allow them to continue. And from there, but however, there is, as we're speaking on this program, serious deliberation that are being led by the United States and very much aligned with MBS Mohammed bin Salman, who has, since the Chinese intervention in diplomatic intervention between the Iranian regime and Saudi has turned away from wanting to bomb or take out the Iranian regime and instead embrace its enemy and try to normalize relations, keeping in mind the 2030 vision. This is the vision that MBS has, and right now it looks like he much prefers soft power over hard power. It puts Israel in a very difficult position because there is no soft power or diplomatic agreement to be had with the Iranian regime. The only question is how. It's not if. And the question is, does Israel take out some of the nuclear sites, setting back the Iranian nuclear program by several years, or does Israel take out elements of the regime. Nobody expected that in just a number of months ago, that Israel would be able to completely strip the Iranian regime of its S-300 Russian air defense systems. No one imagined that Israel could do that on its own. And within 3 hours, Israel was in full control of the Iranian airspace. So Israel has a lot of surprises up its sleeve. There really is a strategic question as to if Israel and the United States if the Iranian regime and the United States come to some sort of what we call JCPOA 2.0, whether that's going to completely tie Israel's hands from taking action against the Iranian regime, which it has to do one way or the other in order to eliminate this existential threat against Israel and by extension the Jewish people worldwide.
Right. Now, just stay with us. We do have some updates coming in from some other media sources. There is a CNN reporting that they have a Trump administration source that said that after the release of EDAN Alexander, negotiations for a comprehensive peace agreement will begin immediately. I also mentioned earlier that Adam Bowler, who had been the point man for the Trump administration, who had met directly with Hamas officials, the first time, at least that's been done publicly or known, yes. And he seemed to be sidelined. He is actually now with the Alexander family on the plane as it is making its way to Israel, also saying that Trump told him that EDAN's release is just the beginning and that they will ensure the release of all the hostages. So it does seem that this is not a kind of one-off. This is the beginning of a new process, Ruthie and Dan, that is now starting. Again, hard to imagine Israel going to this full military operation in the Gaza Strip if the Trump administration now wants an all-in effort for some kind of a deal to end at the fighting in Gaza and perhaps extend it further. We don't even, again, with President Trump, you don't know how far his ambitions actually extend here.
Well, let's put it this way.
It's a big problem.
Go ahead, Dan.
Oh. You've got a big problem here because what ends up happening here is the Hamas stays in power. The Hamas stays in power. We get every single one. Israel gets every single one of its living and dead hostages back. Israel loses the war. Israel loses the war. The entire we're in big trouble. Let's put it that way. And we obviously will do everything to get all these hostages back. This is exactly Iran Hamas's strategy, is to drive a wedge between Israel and the United States and to isolate Israel by using the humanitarian, by weaponizing this humanitarian effort by the United States. We've got to understand what's going on here. It's not just about returning the hostages. It's about political warfare, cognitive warfare, and isolating Israel on the international stage.
Ruthie, now I'm sorry to have interrupted you earlier, but...
Oh, that's fine. But when you say, okay, first of all, you use the word peace deal, which
Ruthie, I'm quoting the Trump, CNN reporting a Trump administrative source.
Okay, so I would also say to the Trump administration source, don't use that word. You hear the word peace, get ready for bloodshed, okay? Forget it. Whatever deal is going on here, peace is nowhere near it. What we want, if this is just the beginning of the release of the rest of the hostages, that's terrific, as long as the price is not an end to the war and Hamas remaining in power. In such a fantasy land, you told me it was a fantasy for us to have, let's just rescue them all.
No, I think what I mean is that it seems to that has passed. There might have been opportunities, but that now, under the current circumstances.
Right. So, but again, Israel cannot agree to an end to this war, and if that's what there is where there will be a clash with the Trump administration if the Trump administration expects Israel to now, as opposed to doing these, I didn't like them either, these trenches of hostage releases with temporary ceasefires. Okay, because we've got to rescue as many as we can. I think everybody agrees with that. We get as many as we can out. But if what you're saying is Trump is not going to aim for we get them all out and make some kind of phony deal with Hamas, like a phony deal with Iran. I know. You're quoting CNN.
I'm quoting Trump administration source.
Right. And I would say that to the Trump administration as well. I would say that to Trump as well. And just as you cannot make a deal with Iran, any deal, there is no such thing as a good deal. Okay, they're liars, murderers, And I'm hoping he won't be duped by them. He has made some tough statements alongside his ambiguous statements. And even Steve Witkoff, yesterday, I believe it was, said, no, they cannot have any nuclear capabilities, Iran. Yeah. And Trump even said, you do it either nicely or not nicely. It will destroy the facilities. So we'll see with Iran. But with Hamas, there is no way Israel can agree to end this war, period. Cannot. So whatever pressure is going to come, if it does, from the Trump administration on this score, there is where there will have to be a clash, because it's not just people inside Netanyahu's coalition. I mean, ironically, this is what I would say. In the event, unlikely event, that Netanyahu would certainly turn around and say, okay, we're ending the war, Hamas stays in power, I'll be out demonstrating. Okay.
Well, well, you know what? Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, okay. Again, I just want to repeat. And actually, there have been some public comments apparently being made. We hope to bring you those soon from Trump administration officials. I want to go back to Dan on this because as we're sitting here in the studio, Dan, things are developing very quickly. As it would seem, almost, again, with sort of unprecedented speed. And again, with your reaction to that, I mean, what would you like to see President Trump go with their message to Saudi Arabia? We understand that may not be what he has in mind, but how do you feel that would be in the best interest, not just of Israel, but of the United States?
The best interest of the United States is to destroy Hamas. And obviously, there's a different timeline. There's the Trump timeline, and then there's the Netanyahu timeline. So I think ultimately our strategic objectives are aligned. Netanyahu has been talking about his legacy achievement is going to be normalization with Saudi Arabia. But the question is, what does the pathway to normalization with Saudi Arabia look like? Right now, as Ruthie pointed out, there is a near-term potential collision here between Israel and the United States over the pathway to the same strategic objective of normalization. The United States does not perceive that Hamas is a direct threat to the United States national security. And in fact, I think that President Trump and MBS share a regional vision that includes bringing other countries into the circle of peace, into the Abraham Accords, creating this new Abraham Security Alliance, which Prime Minister Netanyahu talked about during his presentation in front of the joint session of Congress back in August 2024. So there is a lot of crossover. There is a lot of convergence, but we are at a very particularly acute, sensitive moment where the Hamas and Gaza is not just about Hamas and Gaza. It will reverberate and echo across the world if Israel is seen as losing and Hamas stays in power. It simply cannot be. So Israel is going to have to will have to continue the war. I'm actually convinced that the Netanyahu coalition will continue the war one way or the other. It may be bringing all the hostages back, a cessation of hostilities, and then Israel will restart the war, in the same way that the United States continued after 9/11. There were breaks in the United States counteroffensive after the 9/11 massacre, and that may be what it will be with Israel. But all bets are off when you're fighting the Hamas. This is not a state. This is.
Well, Dan, so let me just ask, because as you say, it's not a state; it's a terrorist movement. It's not. It's going to be that the Hamas is going to sign a declaration that it's surrendering. And remember, the Hamas, much of the Hamas leadership is actually outside of Gaza, sitting in Qatar, of course. So the question, some of the criticism has been, what is Israel's, or specifically the Netanyahu government's vision of a post-Hamas Gaza? What would be its vision? Because it's not just defeating it militarily. You have to have some kind of government or framework or security apparatus in place that's going to prevent Hamas as an idea from, as a lot of terrorist movements have, the way Islamic State has reconstituted itself in parts of Syria and Iraq. You have to have some kind of alternative. What do you see, and I'll ask it to Ruthie afterwards too, as the should be the Israeli vision of a post-Hamas Gaza?
Well, there are several options, Caleb. Number one, Israel has all the rights, according to international law, to apply Israeli law to Gaza. having been attacked by Gaza and by its citizens and its Hamas terror government. So option number one is operationalizing the Trump vision, which is turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. It's completely possible. We already know that there are way beyond 50% of the Gazan residents that have expressed interest, according to Palestinian polls, that they would like to relocate on the basis of humanitarian relocation, either temporarily or permanently. This was a shared idea between President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu. There are candidates in the Arab and Muslim world that would take most, if not all, of the Gazan residents. That's probably the best strategy, is to empty Gaza out, to be able to rebuild it, and then vet those who want to come into Gaza. They will not be part of the Hamas death cult. They will be residents and that will be vetted. The other option is to have a completely neutered Hamas or denuded Hamas, and then bring in I would say a sort of an Arab League, a type of Arab League protectorate for Gaza. That's another option for Gaza. But what is not an option for Gaza is just living with a weakened Hamas of any particular kind. There are clearly families. There is local leadership in Gaza, but again, they are mafia families. They are not necessarily better than the Hamas. So, in my personal assessment, I would sign on to the Trump vision for assisting the what we call the humanitarian relocation of the Hamas public into other countries in the Middle East, whether it's Qatar, Indonesia, Pakistan, Syria, Egypt. There are plenty of places that can take Hamas's residents, Gaza's residents, empty it out and rebuild it, vetting those who can come back in.
All right, Dan Dyker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Thank you for joining us on ILTV on this special broadcast, Dan.
Thanks very much, Khaled. Thanks to Ruthie, too.
Thanks, Dan.
Let me ask you, Ruthie, because he did give a vision, but of course there are some constraints on that. And earlier he did speak about the Trump vision, which you see as a sort of an opportunity that perhaps Israel missed. If that is the case, what are the alternatives for Israel? And again, some of the criticisms of Prime Minister Netanyahu, Dan has actually laid it out quite succinctly. Some of the criticism of Prime Minister Netanyahu that he hasn't actually done that or made sufficient steps to whatever vision he has for a post-Hamas Gaza come into being.
Right. Well, he was being criticized for that from October 7th onward. Like, okay, what's the day after the day after? All right. Now, I agree with everything Dan said. I don't know exactly. I do think that Israel has to occupy Gaza militarily initially, the way it's any area that the IDF clears out of terrorists, it should stay right there. That's what we've decided now. For afterwards, I think, yes, if that fantasy could be realized, what Trump suggested, at first it just sounded like it made the whole world burst out laughing. Some happily, some thought he was crazy, but sounded good. But I
know you use the word fantasy, not me.
Yeah, no, I did, because it sounds almost like you'd say, really? I mean, a Riviera out of it, that hellhole, etc. But what I would say, I just would like to add one thing to what Dan had said.
Sure.
That it just cannot be the Palestinian Authority that takes over Gaza either, because they're terrorists in ties. And, the idea that somehow they're better than Hamas, I disagree with that, because in fact, it's the Palestinian Authority that raised the children. It's those textbooks. It's their glorifying martyrdom. It's their paying salaries to terrorists. So there's no way it can be with the Palestinian Authority. So it is a tricky situation, but afterwards, if there is and I think very often in the Middle East, you buy time. You might say, maybe that's why Netanyahu didn't say, here's our plan for the day after. It depends. It depends what happens with Iran. Do we defeat Iran? Do we bomb their facilities? Do we make peace with Saudi Arabia? There are many pieces in the puzzle, and I think you can't know for sure until other pieces move. Right. And then you say, oh, now we can do that. And we know that in the past, that Who would have thought? There are many issues that we
Right.
said, or who would have believed that? So I don't know exactly, but I know what can't be. It can't be Hamas, it can't be Fatah, and it can't be Islamic Jihad.
I did not mention the reports that Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, is going to meet Trump in Saudi Arabia. I did not mention it because it is one of those unconfirmed media reports
Right.
that has come up, but that.
But it could be true.
But it could be,
It could
and this
be
is something that
it could.
that the Netanyahu government will have to contend with. Let's go back to our Shosh Bedrosian there in Hostage Square. Shosh, we are really in a waiting game. Again, we've never everything about this day is unprecedented. We thought we might see it. We still don't know when EDAN Alexander is going to be freed, and I guess that's part of that uncertainty is also impacting on the situation there in Hostage Square. People don't even know to come out yet whether they're going to be coming out to actually see EDAN's release.
Right. So the delay is no surprise, but we haven't seen a delay this long yet when it comes to these hostage releases. Now, there have been a lot of people who have trickled in and out, kind of checking in to see if there's any updates or anything like that, and people trying to find the right timing of when to come. I know some people here are trying to track this flight that EDAN Alexander's mother, Yael, is on. Right now, apparently it's supposed to land around 3 p.m. Then she will need to get all the way down to Reim, to this military base, where she will then be reunited with her son, EDAN Alexander. Of course, timing of how she will get down to the base, of course, will depend on how they decide to transport her there. And then once there, we do know that EDAN will likely be handed over in Khan Yunis, which is a central city inside of Gaza. And of course, with the war and the ongoing ground offensive, how long that will take to get from him, from Khan Yunis back into a place where the IDF will pick him up and then bring him back to Reim. So there's a lot of things that could be causing the delay, who will be meeting him, and what that procedure will look like. But right now, here in Hostage Square, like I said, some people trickling in and out. I do think the emotion is still high. There's some emotional music playing in the background. And what everybody is waiting for is that moment where they can lay eyes on EDAN Alexander after more than 580 days of Hamas captivity. It is a miracle. So many people are saying that this release is actually taking place. It was a surprise release even for EDAN Alexander's family and for the public here in Israel that have waited so long to see these people come back out alive. He's a young man, 21 years old, had 2 birthdays in Hamas captivity. He was kidnapped when he was just 19 years old as a lone soldier on the border of Gaza, an American, as we continue to report. Of course, there are 4 more bodies of Americans still in captivity at this time, whose families are pleading for them to also be released to close this horrific emotional circle that they've been dragged into for the last year and a half. So we will still be on deck waiting to see all of this unfold. But for now, I'll send it back to you. Kalev?
All right, Shosh Bedrosian there in Hostage Square. Thank you for that. I want to thank Ruthie Bloom from the JNS for joining us. And let me just say on a personal note, as a young man who also left his family behind in the United States, moved to Israel, served as a lone soldier, I cannot wait to see for the release of this heroic, courageous young man, EDAN Alexander from Tenafly, New Jersey, who came here to Israel, served the Jewish state in its armed forces, suffered what no one should have to suffer over 584 days, and hopefully we are just moments away from his release to rejoin his family. Thank you for joining us on this special broadcast on ILTV.